Welcome to Babblecom 5. This is episode 5 of season 5 of Babylon 5. Taval is trying to teach meditation to his Anlashok acolytes on Minbar. Whilst they all have the sitting part down to a T, the silent thinking and concentration leave something to be desired. Plus the Pakmarar has a tendency to fall asleep. Duran arrives to tell Taval he's wanted on Babylon 5, as Delenn has asked for a progress update, and he's to accompany him despite his age, because everyone else is busy, apparently. 2 acolytes are to accompany him, one a humorous religious caste member, Tanir, the other a warrior caste, Rastin, keener on action than meditation. On the station, a lovely gentleman named Trace has an albino accomplice ensure that people get the fatal message that he doesn't like to be paid late. Until Delenn greets the 2 experienced hands and the acolytes. She is perhaps less formal than they expected. In the mess, Garibaldi is having breakfast and motions Zack over before also inviting Lockley to sit. Any suggestion of civility goes out the window quite rapidly as Garibaldi, who doesn't need to tiptoe around her, asks her outright if she was on Clark's side during the war. Zack tries to intervene, but fails. Finally, Lockley acknowledges that having never received an order that challenged her conscience personally, she followed the chain of command, rather than making a personal judgment about how the universe should operate. She declares herself a soldier knowing just 3 words: loyalty, duty, honour. If she'd done it Garibaldi's way, one of those would have gone. Then the other 2 wouldn't have meant a thing. She takes her leave with no response, save for some quiet applause from some other occupants of the room. She catches up with Sheridan in the lift, noting the exchange with Garibaldi, but it doesn't change anything for her. In fact, it just makes her more confident that this is where she needs to be. Sheridan tries to reassure her that Garibaldi will come around, but she's not holding her breath. She actually thinks they're a lot alike, only the second man she's run into that she could say that about. Zack has received Trace's message, as has everyone else. A single shot PPG kill, the body moved because otherwise there'd be some blood on the deck, even with cauterization. He appeals to the civic-minded amongst the onlookers, noting that this is the 3rd execution-style killing in the last couple of weeks, and any of them could be next. No one is forthcoming, and Trace is in the crowd. He doesn't like Zack's efficiency, and orders the albino to take him out. One of the more resident hoodlums notes to Trace that after Nagrath was brought down, remember him, the insectoid broker from the first season? They're now in a position to control all the rackets on the station. He's concerned that by taking out Zack they'll draw too much attention. Trace is new, he's from Beta 7, and there they killed 2 heads of security, and then found the 3rd they could do a deal with. With the war they were moved on. Now he wants to set up in the same way here. He and his gang are clearly set on this way of operation in order to make Babylon 5 their new home. Delenn's meeting with the Rangers notes the expansion of the Anlashok to Alliance races, but they are at a loss with what to do with Pakmarar, who won't even learn the required languages and will only eat food that is 5 days dead. Delenn considers this and notes that the Ranger training program was originally designed for solely Minbari recruits. So perhaps the Pakmarar are not the problem, but the Rangers' way of thinking is. She follows this line of thought, noting that the Pakmarar are everywhere, bargaining for what they need, yet everyone goes to great lengths to avoid them to the point they are effectively invisible. So who better to use as couriers for sensitive items that cannot use normal channels? Duran can see the merit and resolves to alter their training on his return to Minbar. As they leave, Taval discusses Marcus, saying his passing is a pity as he was one of his better students, but the passing wasn't unexpected because he joined for the wrong reasons. Speaking of which, he dismisses his acolytes to explore the stations they should become familiar with it. He then speaks to Delenn about Lanier's training and his concern that he is pushing himself too hard, too fast, showing recklessness as if he has something to prove. He wonders if his motivation lies in proving himself to someone. Delenn is not surprised by this and asks Taval to let her know if he continues to train in this manner. Garibaldi is briefing 2 of Byron's less than enthusiastic telepaths on his plans for them, which in fairness sound eminently reasonable. Once they're gone, he asks Zack for Lockley's information jacket, which is classified, but apparently he did the same thing with Sheridan when he first arrived. Something isn't adding up for him in Sheridan choosing her for the role. mainly why he trusts her when she wasn't on their side during the war. Zack is uncomfortable with the request and is saved by a lead on the murder case. The woman who provided the lead has, of course, been bribed by Trace, but when she learns they intend to kill Zack, she has second thoughts and is restrained by one of his men. Her screams draw the attention of the Minbari acolytes, but only Tanya of the religious caste goes to investigate, Rastin trying to prevent him. He is quickly outnumbered but frees the woman and disarms Trace before he is overwhelmed by numbers. Trace knows who the Rangers are and figures he will make a substitute for Zack. Fortunately, the woman calls security but seems to refuse the ticket Trace gave her to get off station, so they don't know who he is. Tanya survives the beating, barely, where a human wouldn't have. The other Minbari declare Moradun, an early part of Ranger training, meaning the application of terror. They request that Franklin get Tanya on his feet. They will attend to the rest. Delenn goes to see Lockley to, as Lockley puts it, pull rank in order to get Ranger jurisdiction over the attack. Lockley doesn't understand the cultural imperative, but Delenn assures her it's not about revenge, it's about terror. She wants to get Sheridan's input, but of course Delenn's already had it approved. Lockley is surprised, saying it's not like him. This turn of phrase puzzles Delenn. In Medlab, Rastin has been looking after Tanya, who has regained consciousness to ask for water but faded out again. Taval gently pushes Rastin about his reasons for not assisting Tanya, and it seems to come down to him not wanting to attend to trivial things, out of fear that his death would then have no purpose. Taval asks if he would go up a mountain to get a flower for him, knowing he would die afterwards. He says no. Taval asks if his view would change if that flower were the symbol of hope for 1 million people waiting at the bottom of the mountain. For him, being a ranger is doing things because they are right, first and foremost, because he believes that no death is without meaning if it results from the following of one's heart. The size of the task does not matter. With Rastin's terror addressed, it now remains for Tanya's terror to be addressed. Delenn explains to Lockley in voiceover as Tanya hobbles out of Medlab that the men who attacked him have power over him. He must face his terror alone, as we all do in the end, for to be a ranger is to face that which you fear. He must reclaim his power even though he might fail in the attempt. So it is that Zack pulls his people out to the short-lived light of Tracer's group, as their section is plunged into the darkness of emergency lighting. 2 scouts are quickly brought down by rangers, the rest of the group whittle down as they try and get to levels they believe will be unaffected by the lighting change. The rangers are deeply efficient between their use of elbows and pikes. The group is brought down to leave only Trace, encircled by rangers but not molested until finally Tanya faces him. Trace is offered a pike but he refuses to fight, claiming he has rights. Tanya strikes him, and he finally picks up the pike as the instructors run a commentary on how hopeless he is with it, describing him as what humans call a bully, all muscle, no brain, reliant on others to do his dirty work. Having failed with the pike, he drops it, and Tanya drops his, but Tanya's martial skills are more than enough even in his injured state, and he soon drops Trace. Finally, Taval asks him if he feels triumphant, and he says no, he just feels pity because this is all Trace will ever be. His name will be swallowed by history. Tanya's name, however, is his own. The lesson ends, and Zack arrives to take out the trash. Delenn bids the masters farewell, saying that she should be home before too long, and that she would like Tanya to be a house guard for her and Sheridan when the time comes. She also notes that he handled the pike remarkably well for a mere acolyte whose training was not complete, which apparently Duran has had a hand in. In Zack's office, Garibaldi notes that he hadn't really appreciated before that Minbari seemed genetically unable to walk away from a fight. Citing what's just happened, the Earth-Minbari War, Delenn's encounter with the Drak in the last season, where the humans would have called in reinforcements, Delenn faced the terror and went straight back into the fight, live or die. He's still angling to get the captain's file up, but Zack's still resisting. In the quarters of the Sheridans, it's bedtime, but as Sheridan is closing the door to the bedroom, Delenn calls him on Lockley's comment from earlier and Sheridan's faces a picture. After what is clearly one explanation later, the air in the bedroom is decidedly frosty, but it's not clear what the explanation involved, although we can hazard a guess. Asked if she's okay, Delenn says it will take some getting used to, and John should have told her 10 seconds after he thought about it, rather than waiting to be caught out. So, very much a classic V5 story structure with plots A and B running together to a resolution. But there is also a third plot here, which is Garibaldi's itch over Lockley and Sheridan, which may or may not be resolved by Lockley's comment to Delenn and the resultant deep freeze at the end of the episode. So clearly we are left dangling on this on purpose to set tongues wagging, because as we've always suspected since the get-go of this season, had Lockley been on Sheridan's side during the Civil War, she would have just out and out said that from the start. As it is, she perhaps stands in a middle ground of principled officers not asked to fire on civilians. In that scenario, with no other hard evidence, and this may explain the applause, she is within her military rights to keep on following her chain of command, because if soldiers did constantly challenge the principles of their superiors, they probably wouldn't have very long military careers. Ultimately, I guess she'd have to submit to a military tribunal were there any questions over her actions during the conflict. And yet, there's something else too, because her comments about John suggests she knew him well enough to express surprise at a course of action she considered out of character, which means that she knows his character. So yes. Plots A and B are quite self-explanatory, but what I really picked up on was that the application of terror was not what I thought. I'm not sure if I got hold of this first time round, and I'm happy to be corrected now. So, as I read it, this time is that if a ranger is defeated, they are obligated to face that defeat as soon as they are able, not to cause terror, but to defeat their internal terror. Otherwise, they would be forever weakened. I think I took the application of terror as being literal because of the Batman-esque way in which the Rangers strike from the dark to take their opponents down, but it's actually about Tanya facing down the bully in a relatively fair fight to regain his confidence. Like having a car crash and not driving again straight afterwards, so you don't have time to build excuses not to do it. And I agreed with Garibaldi on Delenn going back in after the Drac. It seemed to make zero sense at the time, but in a Ranger mindset, and perhaps a Minbari mindset, I guess it does make sense despite being a high-risk approach to combat. Price was just a bit of a meh villain of the week when all was said and done, although his planning wasn't bad. It was certainly interesting to get Nigrath name checked after all this time. I don't think we'd heard about him, her, it for years. And all of a sudden, us old timers get to do a Captain America and say, we understood that reference. It's also good that Zach's holding his ground against Garibaldi's attempts to get Lockley's file. I kept thinking Garibaldi would have left himself at least one back door to still get back into the station's systems, but maybe not. A couple of the other Ranger developments were interesting. Delenn thinking to adapt the organisation to the Pak'ma'ra rather than expecting them to adapt to the organisation was cleverly done. And there was also mention of establishing training centres off Minbar for the Rangers, which also makes perfect sense. This, of course, is all part of their transitioning away from being a clandestine anti-shadow force to acting more in the open in a peacekeeping cum police force role. There is also, of course, the mention of Lanier pushing himself harder than is healthy for him, and the question mark over whether he is mentally ready to be a Ranger for the right reasons. I half expected him to have hopped on their flyer, but obviously not. So, not an earth-shattering episode, but it keeps things ticking along, and it's always nice to be reminded of just how effective and unique the Rangers are as a fighting force. It does make you wonder how many of them there will ultimately be, but we already know they endure for many years from the current point in time. So this brings my episode done average up to 2 for the day, just in time as it's a long school holiday and I'm unlikely to either be home or be able to tear the child off Star Citizen on this machine when he's here. So forward planning is required. Catch you in a couple of weeks from my point of view. Cheers for now.